Welcome to the Predictable Revenue Podcast, where sales leaders teach you what's working for them so you can build it yourself.
This episode of the Predictable Revenue Podcast is brought to you by our sales coaching and consulting services. Are you looking to create repeatable, scalable, and predictable revenue? We've helped thousands of companies grow their business with tailored expert advice backed by testing to ensure they establish the best practices that will work for them. Head over to bit.ly/predictable coaching to learn more.
Welcome back to the Predictable Revenue Podcast. I'm your host, Collin Stewart. Today, I'm joined by Petrossi. He's the founder CEO over at Inside Scale, and we're going to talk about the current state of sales development. We're going to talk about sales development teams specifically getting a lot more efficient, and basically what can we expect from a modern sales development team going forward. Lou, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me. Big fan of Predictable Revenue and you and this podcast, and honored to be here.
Right on. I'm a big fan of yours. I've heard, Jake and I kind of keep in contact. He's the one who introduced us, and he always has amazing things to say about you. I know you two have known each other for a long time, worked together in the past. So I'm super excited to have you on the show, get a chance to learn from you.
Thanks. Yeah. And Jake's great. He was a founding SDR when I was a director at TalkDesk, and he's done big things in the space. So it's good to be connected. Yeah.
Totally. I know you just came back from Outreach's conference, and there's been a number of conferences. So I suspect now is the moment that you're currently the most plugged in to the kind of current state of sales development. What's it like out there?
It's tough. The headwinds are strong. And I think the main drivers for that is saturation has created prospect fatigue. I read a stat where I think there's like 68 billion more emails being sent out versus 5 years ago. And that's because of shift to remote. Obviously, we're all sending more emails, but I think companies are trying harder to generate pipeline via email because for a while events were shut down, things like that. So, and it's easier to build software than ever. There's more automation tools out there that make it easy to reach lots of folks. So the volume and the noise is quite high. It's hard to break through. And that's compounded by email deliverability challenges. You can't just buy an automation tool and mass blast mediocre messaging out there. So yeah, those are the two main drivers that are making it tough. And then that's further compounded by shift to remote, great resignation, although I think we're mostly past that now, and PLG movements where folks don't want to talk to sales, and AI is disrupting the space. So it's quite an interesting time for sales developers and sales development leaders. And you really just have to be excellent. I mean, fire on every single best practice possible to create repeatable pipeline. And I think we'll talk more about that in this episode.
100%. Well, I imagine it's got to be a challenging climate for managers right now with every SDR, or maybe not every SDR being remote, but for a lot of SDR teams being remote, hiring remote.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think we have to have empathy as leaders. A lot of us were classically trained in offices, learning via osmosis, and that experience is quite difficult to replicate in the remote setting. So now more important than ever, you have to hire right, but you also have to take the extra steps as a leader to make sure that your team is set up for success. It's something that takes a good amount of building. Hopefully your company has strong core values, and then you as a leader need to come up with very explicit SOPs or SLAs, every little thing that you expect from somebody on a daily, weekly, monthly basis so that they know what their job is. You can't hold someone accountable to their job if they don't know every little detail. And it's not as clear if you're a ramping remote SDR, everything that you should be focusing on day to day, week to week. And then you have to combine that with a robust enablement suite. And once you have that trinity, that triangle of values, enablement, expectations, then if you hire well, you should be able to plug people into a system, a repeatable process that will help them onboard and ramp well.
Mm-hmm. I imagine I liken hiring to remote. People say, oh, it's harder. I don't necessarily think it's harder. It does give you access to a greater talent pool. There's advantages, disadvantages. I do think, though, that a failure state for an SDR is less obvious when they're online versus in the office. In an office, you have the advantage of you can walk by and see, Sarah slept over in her seat, just like pounding the keyboard, like, oh, you look dejected. Tell me what's going on. And that's a lot harder in a remote setting.
It is, yes. How do you mitigate that? You have to keep up with your one-to-ones, make sure to, check in with your folks at the human level. We do morning stand-ups just to build a little bit of a human connection and really check in with folks, make sure that they have a good game plan for the day. But you're right, it's hard to know how people are feeling in the remote setting. So you just got to make the effort to truly check in with your people.
Totally. I'm curious if you've seen a shift in the hiring profile that people are looking for an SDR.
A little bit. I think you have to index on maturity, and that can come at any age. I don't believe in ageism, but you have to really find folks that are self-starters, that are technically proficient / independent. Yes, we're going to train them up on the tooling and give them all the enablement, but you have to be able to troubleshoot and problem solve independently. I think that's a part of the game now. And, cold calling is really, really important nowadays. And I think we'll get more into that later. But you got to find folks that can be trusted to do the work 40 hours a week in the remote setting. So you got to index on like maturity, motivation, competency from a tech perspective, and also from like a art of sales perspective.
Mm-hmm. I'm curious what you're seeing in terms of like SDR management. Are you seeing a lot of full-time sales dev leadership, or are you seeing a lot of side of the desk as VP of sales, director of sales, running both the full cycle, or both the, I'd say, closers and prospectors?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think at the early stage, there's a pattern of hiring one or two SDRs and having them, roll into sales or marketing. I've even seen RevOps in some cases. And that's usually a pretty tough situation for the SDRs, just because if you're a VP of sales or marketing, you have so much on your plate, you don't really have the time to get into the SDR weeds. So I think what happens in those cases often is that there tends to be like a consensus leadership team of a lot of folks that either don't have the time to really stand up SDR and give it all the attention that it needs, or maybe a lot of these folks have never actually done it themselves. So what tends to happen is you have a lot of mistakes across your entire left to right sales development supply chain, not the right tools, bad data, messaging, compensation, like you name it, like low attainment, goaling. All of that stuff is really important to get right. You have to do everything well to bake a sales development cake, and definitely see a lot of orphaned SDRs at the early stage. And we get brought in often to often like 180 a team that's on fire in a bad way. And I imagine predictable revenue gets brought in often after a failure to launch situation, right? So they're like, hey, like we're going to outsource this and work with some pros because we don't have the muscle for this yet internally. So we see that a ton at the early stage. And what's interesting about that is I think the only reason is cost, right? They're like, hey, we don't want to invest in a premium sales development leader at the early stage. We're not ready to make that investment. But I'd argue that it's a lot more costly when you don't, because you're going to have mistakes across your entire sales development supply chain. And it's actually quite expensive and traumatic to replace the wrong tool that was installed, or to have turnover and failure to launch and start over again. So I'd argue that investing early is a more predictable way of going to market from a sales development perspective.
Totally. I mean, so much of what you're doing when you're putting a sales development team or any sales team together, you're trying to balance the risk. And, the less you spend, the lower risk you are on the P&L, but the less, like, you get to a point where you're penny wise and pound foolish if you don't have somebody who knows all the roadblocks that you can run into. And so the question is, what is time worth? And I think in this today, October 2023, we just came out of a cycle where growth at all costs was the mantra, and now it's more profitable growth. I wonder if people are over-optimizing on profitable growth at the risk of, or at the expense of, increasing the riskiness of their SDR teams. You see SDR teams reach a failure state because they don't have the right tool set up, because they're missing out on email deliverability, or they're missing a basic thing like lacking mobile numbers when you're using a tool like Orem. Like I wonder if you're seeing something like this, with the customers that you're working with.
Yeah, almost every single time we start a project, right? Most folks don't work with us because they're crushing it. It's because they need help. And you touched on a lot of the big ones, right? There's usually like not the right data stack. I think messaging governance, is big too. So you tend to see like 100 different sequences, right? When there's not a strong leader in place, really guiding the team, creating those bumpers in the bowling alley, so to speak.
Mm-hmm.
And all of that is inefficiency because you're not having like focused, concentrated effort on cracking that go-to-market code. You're sort of winging it and rolling the dice on, maybe folks that haven't done this before. And that's quite risky and it arguably much more expensive in the short, medium, and long term.
100% agree. I want to stand up for the teams that have 100 sequences going, especially early teams. Nothing wrong with that, as long as it's driving towards eventually 80 better sequences, and then 60 good sequences, and then 40 really, really good sequences, and then 10 excellent sequences. You're all kind of driving and learning. But especially in the early days, I don't know if I would do 100 sequences, but I'm a big fan of going super wide, super short to do a lot of exploration.
Definitely. Yeah. You want to run as many tests, experiments as you can, A/B test every touch, and run lots of different campaigns that are well thought out. And then eventually you get like a repository of repeatable sequences and templates and so forth. So yeah, you also don't want to under engineer your messaging and sequences. So yeah, fair point.
Totally. I want to talk some more about the roadblocks, but there's been so much consolidation and headcount reduction lately. Maybe we go there first, and then we can kind of talk about what is the path forward and what are some roadblocks people got to watch out for. So, where do we go from here? We've seen like 10, 14 years of growth at all costs. Then in 2022, somebody pulled the handbrake and it's like, hey, let's slow down profitable growth. Where are we now? What happens next?
Sure. With respect to consolidation, I think there's some very good reasons for it. And traditionally, I was always a point solutions guy because all-in-one solutions historically didn't used to be that awesome, like tend to be good on one category and kind of like a B or a C and the rest. That being said, there's some incredible platforms out there now. Like I'm blown away by Apollo.io and Outreach. Those are comprehensive and truly high quality platforms end to end. So you can get away with, just focusing on, a platform like that. But I'd caution against consolidating your data stack. That's usually a bad idea. One data provider very rarely will give you total TAM coverage. And I think we'll get into the weeds a little bit more later on this conversation, but definitely don't consolidate your data stack for reasons of cold calling and things like that. And then if you're looking to create an efficient team, you need to figure out how to safely max activities per SDR. How do you do that? Well, you can focus on email deliverability and improve sending capacity, but really there's a limit on how much you can safely max out emails. So long story long, we like power dialing. I think we both are huge fans of Orem and
massive.
And Orem turns every SDR into 1.52 SDRs from an activities perspective. And to fuel that, you really need to invest in data and in calling at scale. So if you're leveraging an Apollo or an Outreach, don't stop there. Buy 2 or 3 data tools, teach your sales operations or RevOps team how to mash up data, engineer the flow of data to really feed your team well. And
I want to go ahead. When you finish that, I want to add a point.
I was just saying, just strongly consider adding a power dialer into the equation. And if you do that, you can have like a leaner stack, but just invest in data and invest in tooling, and that's how folks actually do more, and that's how teams can do more with a leaner team.
100%. Proof in the pudding. I invited Orem onto the podcast. I think their episode launches mid-October. I just had Drew on. He was awesome. It was probably the best 45 minutes of talking about cold calling I've had on this podcast ever. I'm not sure what the order of operations, if this one's coming out first or that one's coming out first, but yeah, go look in your podcast. If it's out, go check that one out if you're interested in cold calling or if you want to learn a little bit more about Orem. The thing I will add is our team uses Orem, and I won't go too much into the details, but we ran an experiment side by side, Apollo data only, and then Apollo plus Clay, and Clay gives us access to, I think we use like 5 or 6 different sources on top of Apollo for mobile numbers. My connects on one client went from an average of 4 a day connects on 100 dials to 9 with when I added in Clay. And I saw a couple that were 13, 14. And so I think the trend was picking up. It would probably go even higher than 9, but it at least doubled the number of connects. And when you think about, the cost of that body and the effectiveness of that individual over the phone, I'm basically paying, I don't know, their chunk of the data for Clay, rounding up and being very conservative, was maximum $100. And so I spent $100 per SDR to double the effectiveness of the phone, of themselves on the phone. And 70% of our meetings come from the phone. So that's the best $100 I've ever spent. You don't have to use Clay. It just gives you access to a whole bunch. I just want to double down on Lou's point that one data provider to rule them all is not a great strategy anymore. You need to have multiple.
This is the way. Yeah, good job. That's a good connect rate.
This is the way. So we've talked a little bit about kind of, the path forward. I want to talk about some roadblocks, efficient teams. We talked a little bit about, I think one of my biggest roadblocks, was the data, was that mobile data. I hear so many people say, oh, the phone doesn't work. And I'm like, is it the phone didn't work? Is it that your script didn't work? Is it that your SDR didn't want to cold call? Is it that you didn't have good data? Is it that they were tired of sitting there and clicking to hit their 80 dials because they didn't have the right tool set? Like 5 pretty large roadblocks right there. I'm curious, what are you seeing around cold calling? And what are some of the other roadblocks that you're seeing people run into?
For cold calling specifically, you just have to get your data operations straight. And a lot of folks, surprisingly don't have, you can get a whole lot out of Zoom info, but a lot of folks don't have their fields mapped properly. So they're not separating the corporate line from a direct dial from a mobile number. And then those aren't pushing into the right fields and outreach, and they're not flowing into the right fields in the right order in Orem. So it's like a very basic recommendation, but surprisingly, a lot of folks don't have that mapped. So that's step 1. And then if you want to get advanced, you need to consider, layering on extra vendors. And in terms of road blockers, I think, if you're using a standard click to call solution, it's tough to get connects. How many times have you done a call shadow session with an SDR and you're lucky to get 1 pickup, right? So you just can't get there fast enough. And I think folks kind of get tired of all that button pressing and dispositioning, and that's why power dialers are rad, right? Because it automates away all the not awesome button pressing, and you just get that many more conversations, which improves your skill building and your script effectiveness and your ability to coach and all of that. And then maybe another blocker is just that consolidation movement, right? Where folks are like, why should we buy more than one data provider? We already have Zoom info, right? So that mentality, I think, can prevent SDR leaders or sales teams from getting all the data that they need. So, to any RevOps folks that listen to this, get the requirements from the SDR leaders. They're intimately familiar with the problem, and you want to gather those requirements from the tip of the spear because they're going to know what they need.
Totally. I mean, let's pretend you could hire Tony Stark versus you could hire Iron Man to do any job. Who's going to do it better? Aside from maybe like knitting or sewing, where you need like real fine motor and the suit wouldn't work very well, Iron Man's going to do a much, much better job because he's got all this additional equipment there to assist him. And I think that's kind of it feels like the age that we're in, where if you don't have the Iron Man suit, your reps are at a disadvantage compared to your competitors' reps.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, the teams that are going hard on data operations and growth hacking and creating research efficiencies through AI, like they're going to outperform the teams that aren't doing that. Absolutely. Yeah. And your SDRs and your AEs should all be wearing little Iron Man suits. Yeah, that's a good analogy.
And can we sidebar on something? I'm curious because I've got I'm working on the next PR methodology, and we've got the idea of the 4 funnels: meet, disco, manage, nurture. And for each one, there's the kind of stages and stats, and define when you enter here, define when you exit there. Something that I've been experiencing is when I'm working with a client and they're building a new SDR team, they want to over optimize for everything working together. They want to have SalesLoft or Outreach and Apollo working perfectly with their CRM. They want to integrate all the data, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, which is good, but it creates a lot of work in the first 90, 180 days. Like these are not, it's simple enough to do it like a basic integration, but it can be a good amount of work to do this. If I'm ramping a new team, I don't care necessarily about all the data mapping perfectly to my CRM. I want to see results as fast as possible. I'm curious your perspective. Do you do the data ops right away, or do you say, you know what, it doesn't matter if all the prospects are in your CRM, like the meet funnel, your funnel for meeting new clients doesn't need to be fully mapped into the CRM. Do you care? Is that something you do first? Is what I'm saying totally against the grain?
Yeah, I think you want to optimize for going live as quickly and responsibly as possible, and you want to optimize for hitting goal month over month. And it's a balance, right? You want to do all that responsibly. You also want to you want to have the tools configured good enough. Obviously, there's like advanced, there's endless building and optimization that you can do, and that never ends. Is like sales development's not static, just like any other business segment. Our clients tend to demand, ops excellence, and we assign SDR ops resources as well as leadership resources to our clients. So we're able to pull all of that off. But you're right, there is a balance there. You want to optimize for hitting numbers as quickly and as responsibly as possible. That being said, it's not so hard to get activities flowing into the CRM. You want to have all that activity inside the CRM. And so I think you do both, but you don't over index on building a perfect process, because it just takes time.
Fair. I think this is one of those questions to which there's no right answer. It depends on the situation, and there's a spectrum of correct answers depending on where you're at. And if you're a brand new startup and you've got no inbound and your network is small and you're just trying to do something, zero integration, your CRM should be a spreadsheet at this stage. And if you even can spell integration, I'm disappointed in you. Whereas if you're funded Series B, then absolutely everything should be integrated to your CRM. But there's a huge kind of spectrum in between, and there's a bunch of different situations you might be in, and that might be a combination of the two.
Yeah, I agree. And you do have to put some preventative measures in place, though, to make sure that you're not messaging active customers or active opportunities, things like that. So that's where integration becomes important, just making sure that everyone's working in parallel and that there's not some big, kind of back end mess at the CRM level and sales engagement level.
Totally. I think I've come from this. I'm thinking about this from like an outsourcer's perspective, where I'm like, DNC list is good enough. We got a process for updating it, and I want to go live as quickly as possible because I'm at the bleeding edge of maybe not bleeding edge, but the leading edge of this has to be profitable. And so I want to optimize for as many meetings as quickly as possible and with the least amount of work, and adding in any sort of integrations is going to take your prospects, your customers' time, as well as your internal resources. And so I always say, like, let's wait until there's meaningful activity here, and then let's talk about the integrations. So I'm like, get the process going first, then we work on paving the path once you're starting to see meaningful results. Am I doing it wrong? Disagree?
No, that resonates. I mean, as service providers, we have to demonstrate value quickly. That's a big part of our world and our game. So I totally get that. Just got to make sure that, you're not, blasting customers and, calling into active opportunities, things like that. So just put a few safety mechanisms in place. But again, it's not crazy hard to integrate outreach with Salesforce, et cetera, et cetera. So there tends to be some sprints in that first month that we're working on with clients when email deliverability is warming up, things like that. There's enough time to get the minimum viable foundation in place. But to your point, like over-engineering, over-indexing on perfect end-to-end processes could slow down the go live. And the go live is incredibly important, for the SDR's ramp and trajectory and morale. And for us as service providers, clients expect a lot quickly, and delivering quickly is a big part of our game.
100%. We've talked about data operations. We've talked about the minimum viable. We talked a little bit about cold calling roadblocks. What other roadblocks? Maybe talk to me about email deliverability as a potential roadblock, or areas where companies can get tripped up if they don't have a Lou building their team for them.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, it's been a gray art for years, but I think we're getting there as a segment. I'm shocked by how many people don't have email deliverability infrastructure in place. Almost every client that we start at doesn't have very much in place. And they're sending volume through their core domain, which is quite risky. Yeah, it's not good. So what do? You have to spin up redundant domains. You have to programmatically warm them up. You can go live on your core domain for a little while. You just have to really have tight front-end sending disciplines. We coach SDRs to have, very budgeted, metered out activities. There's even a new or newish email deliverability tool called Allegro, which has a safety net built into SalesLoft and Outreach, which literally prevents spam from going out. So if you have these mechanisms in place, that will create a buffer, on your core domain. But as quickly as you can, you want to port all outbound activity onto these redundant domains.
And what are you using Allegro for?
Email deliverability. Yeah, but they also have, they took it a step further. Most email warm-up tools are just back-end, they plug into Gmail or Outlook and they improve your reputation. They do all of that, but they took it a step further and they actually built an integration with SalesLoft and Outreach. So they have a safety net mechanism that will flag suspicious looking emails that are likely to get reported as spam. And I think they have some network that they've been building. So they have data on folks that are likely to flag you as spam. So it's a nice guardrail and that you can put in place for if you're using those tools.
100% agree. The removing the kind of, I wouldn't say bad actors, but the evangelists, the email evangelists from your list, there are always folks that are more likely to report you or are known honeypots. We use a tool called Zero Bounce to pull those out. We find it pretty good. I'm wondering if does Allegro do the list cleaning or do you use something else?
It sounds similar, the feature that you mentioned, to Allegro. We like using another provider called MailReach as well, but MailReach doesn't have the integrations with the sales engagement platform. I'd say if you have a strong ops team and a strong sales development leadership team, MailReach is a great option. Zero Bounce, is that what you said? Zero Bounce?
Yeah, zero bounce is what we use to clean the list. We use Smart Lead for some sequencing, like email, and then they also have a warm up function that I use MailReach and Smart Lead. Smart Lead's great if you got a huge team because the pricing just scales a little bit better than MailReach. We got pretty up there with our MailReach bill, and we ended up kind of replicating 95% of the functionality with Smart Lead.
Yeah. And you can send quite a bit of volume through like the smart leads and instant leads, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Initially, we were just using it for warming, and what we noticed was it has a bit of a deliverability edge over some of the mainstream platforms, just in the way. I think the thing that Vaibhav at SmartLead has figured out is that the Gmail is not just looking at your traditional elements for email deliverability anymore. They're also looking at the reputation of the IP address of the server that initiates the batch. And so if you're listening, you're going, what the hell did he just say? It's basically SmartLead has a server, but then they also have all these mini servers, and each of those mini servers has, this is directionally correct, but technically probably false. Those mini servers are basically the sending nodes or the queuing system, and they're going to have an IP address. And that server is going to connect to Gmail. And what Vaibhav has discovered, and why SmartLead is a little bit better, is there's a reputation associated with the IP address of SmartLead servers. And so he has a huge band, like massive amount of IP addresses, and each one is recycled and rested for, I think, at least a year in between campaigns. So if you've got 30 campaigns going, you've got 30 different IP addresses that SmartLead is connecting to Gmail, so that it's one of those additional layers of like risk reduction. Wow. Sorry, I got deeper into the email deliverability piece than I was planning on. Sorry, it happens sometimes.
Yeah. No, my head hurts. Yeah. It's a tough subject, right? And it's just one of the many things that you have to get right nowadays.
On the internal, back to Lou, on the internal SDR, if you've got somebody prospecting off the parent domain, what's your recommended amount of like maximum amount of traffic, email traffic per day? And then what would you do on a secondary domain?
It's the same amount of volume like per inbox. Mm-hmm. And, Outreach allows you to tether 2 inboxes per one license. Apollo had 5. I think they just announced that it's like 15 now. So that allows you to really fan out your sends, and that's what you want to do. And Google and Outlook, they're looking for spikes, like, big peaks and valleys in your email sends. I think that is in part what, triggers the spam radar. So the best you really want to coach your SDRs to send out even amounts of activity Monday through Friday. And the volume per account, it's a hard question to answer, but generally add 15 net new emails a day, and then the follow-up stack up, and it depends on your cadence, right? So everybody has a different cadence. Some people are sending reply follow-ups every 2-3 days, so that'll factor into your total volume. But you want to get to a place where you've got a lot of consistent activity, a healthy amount of consistent activity 5 days a week. You want to avoid the big spikes.
Totally. Did you say 15 or 50?
15. Yeah, I believe they just had a product update where one license gets you 15 inboxes, which is incredible. So you could really send, 10, 15 emails a day, first touch ads, net new sends, and you fan that activity out. And if it's good messaging that's not link heavy or visual heavy, you can stay below the spam radar.
Yeah, I really miss the days you could send GIFs and not have your email deliverability impacted too greatly.
Yeah, and I'm seeing that some people are still sending out, GIFs, screenshots, all of that. And I loved prospecting with a visual component. It was so helpful. We used to send screenshots on the second touch, and we would pop any meetings from that. Yeah, I don't know. Are you sending any type of visual content out there?
Not on average, no. There are certainly exceptions. We've got a couple of customers in I'd say after we've gotten engagement, then we have gifts that show the magic moment of the product or software, and those are extremely effective. But in terms of leading a cold outbound campaign, no, I try and avoid links, and I want to go as plain text as I can, even pull in some cases, like domains out of the signature.
Yeah, definitely. I like that tactic, what you just mentioned, because when somebody replies, it doesn't mean that you can't respond with a video or a screenshot. So I really like that.
Yeah, having those locked and loaded to show, hey, this is the magic of this is that magic aha moment. Not all customers you can do that for, but if you can, a gift that shows that is super powerful.
Okay, yeah. So then lead with your interest-based CTAs and get the reply, and then you can throw some visual content in there. I like that.
Exactly. Or just funny gifts that you're like, hey, I'm going to try and make a bad pun here. I'm going for it. If I can make a bad pun in a sequence, even if it's a bad idea, I'm still going to go for it just because it makes life more fun. And sometimes it works really, really well. Sometimes it doesn't work at all. But you got to be willing to make mistakes.
When not done well, yes. Absolutely.
Yes, totally. What other roadblocks? We've talked data operations, having the sort of minimum viable, email infrastructure. We talked about cold calling, roadblocks, single point. I'm curious, are there any other major roadblocks we've missed?
I think just getting the right stack in place, the right data stack, email deliverability, starting with the right team is a big part. We talked about, to the extent you can, invest in strong leadership early. I think when we were talking off camera, we both like launching clients with senior SDRs. That's a great idea too. When you combine a senior team you can just crack your go-to-market code that much faster.
Yeah, that was one of the hardest parts of running an outsourced business, where we were giving dedicated SDRs. Because if you're growing, which naturally happens, you're hiring new SDRs, and then you either have to put them in a training program for 90 days, which murders your margin and you got to charge quite a bit more. Or you're putting, 1 month old SDRs onto a client, that's a hard balance as well. And so, yeah, we've changed the model. So now we're getting more experienced and et cetera, but it can be a really challenging one when you're working with junior talent. I did want to kind of wrap, because on the junior talent piece, and I don't want to take this as, I don't think an SDR can start an SDR team. Like, I 100% think that there are SDRs out there that are going to do an amazing job of building that first SDR team. I know a few that are super plugged in, switched on, and they know all these things, they're willing and they're excited to do that. They are the exception rather than the norm. And so I'd love to kind of land this with, Lou, your take on what are some of the core requirements for creating revenue efficient teams?
Yeah, let me make sure I understand your question. So were you talking about, can up-and-comer SDRs be successful builders of SDR teams? Or what's the best way to create an efficient SDR team?
I think, yeah, let's land there, because I think if we start there, it kind of covers the first one.
Sure. So I think I said it a couple times already, but starting with a strong leadership team and pairing that with senior SDR talent is a more efficient way of launching, because you're going to be solving higher value problems. It'll be a much more concentrated effort. Like, you're not going to have tooling issues or bad data or messaging or anything like that, the Wild West of sequencing. So you're going to crack your go-to-market code that much faster and, build the minimum viable infrastructure that's needed to plug in more junior talent, and where they're more likely to be successful. So starting with a senior team is a great idea. If you're consolidating your tech stack, invest a little bit more in data, and also maybe get a power dialer. Now your senior SDRs are cranking twice the amount of dials, getting twice the amount of connects, uncovering your best cold calling scripts, et cetera, booking more meetings, all of that. You want to be data driven from the start. And That's a bit of a process, but if you're using an Outreach.io, you can install their sequence attribution package and start to understand what sequences are contributing to revenue. That's a big one. Getting good dashboards in place early, being data driven is a big part of understanding the right kinds of plays and personas and areas to focus on. All of that is efficiency, focused effort, right, in the launch phase. And I'm sure there's a bunch of other stuff I can't think of right now.
Totally fair. I want to maybe point this a little bit at Inside Scale. If somebody's thinking about building a new revenue team, and I know we've touched on it a couple times, but I just wanted to wrap with a little bit of why should somebody consider hiring somebody like Inside Scale or somebody like Lou? What would your, to that objection or to that kind of question, how would you frame that up?
Sure. I mean, anybody that's serious about standing up or leveling up an SDR function, we're a viable option. And it's because we're experienced. We've done this 75 times, actually standing up sales development teams from the inside out. Hence the name Inside Scale. So we'll help you avoid, those very likely and costly mistakes across email deliverability, data, messaging, attainment, high turnover, low morale, all of that. And we'll help you crack your go-to-market code that much faster and provide you a foundation and a process that is repeatable where you can, plug more junior folks into over time.
Love it. If people are trying to get in touch, they want to reach out, they want to pick your brain on something, they want to hire you, they want to work for you, what's the best way for them to get in touch?
Sure. InsideScale.com. You can hit one of those buttons on our website, or you could email me at Lou, L-O-U, @InsideScale.com.
Right on. Lou, thank you so much for coming on the show. It was amazing to get a chance to learn from you and the 75 teams plus that you've stood up at this point. So thank you so much for sharing.
Thank you for having me. Yeah, great conversation. Thanks.
Right on. And thanks to everybody for listening. We'll see you all next week.